Hello, and welcome to another episode of Breaking Through in Cybersecurity Marketing. I'm one of your hosts, Giana Whitford, here with my rambunctious co-host,
Maria Velasquez.
And today we have a super rambunctious Scottish lord with us today. We have Mr./Lord Ian Patterson. He is CEO at Plurilock. Ian, so glad that you're on the show with us today.
I am excited. I don't know if I've got my snark dial tuned up enough, but I'll give it a try.
Oh, we like the snark dial. We like turn it to 11.
I need to know the story behind Lord Ian before we start.
So I am a romantic at heart. And many moons ago, for Christmas, I believe, I gifted my wife a 1 foot by 1 foot square plot of land in Scotland. And as the story goes, due to a 9th century, 14th century, who knows, some old law of yore, that if you were a landowner, you were eligible to use the prefix laird. It's actually L-A-I-R-D. I have a lot of Scottish ancestry, and so I thought this was appropriate. Obviously, I had to get one for myself because it couldn't just be lady plus Mr. So from that, it was laird and lady Patterson. And so ultimately it was a gift for my wife, although there are certain databases that allowed me to use the prefix rather than Mr. or Sir to put laird. So there you go.
Oh my gosh, that is so cool.
Now you just need to get knight. That's your next one, right?
Yeah.
That's a Pokemon evolution of old timey of
that would
heraldry.
Be a promotion. That would be a promotion, absolutely.
That's your promotion to from VP of marketing to CMO. It's Friday.
It is Friday, and it's Friday before Memorial Day weekend. Does anyone have plans besides to honor our dead soldiers, but like other plans too?
Plans not to have any plans. That's the plan.
I'm gonna interrupt that plan probably like Saturday at noon. Maria's gonna get a text message from me like, "What about this?"
Well, I tell you what, as a Canadian, typically what we would do on an American holiday is catch up on email because we don't have incoming coming in. And so it actually allows us to get to inbox zero. So that's just as a general standard operating procedure for an American holiday where there is no commensurate Canadian holiday, or if it happens to occur on a different day, then that's the SOP or the life hack, depending on your perspective.
That's actually cool.
Oh, so technically it's inbox zero day in Canada on Monday.
Maybe. I mean, let's manage those expectations. So that's the goal.
Here's a question, Ian, that is so important. Do Americans send more email than other countries? Because we're going to talk about global differences and regional differences and go to market. So are Americans email happy people?
That's a great question. So I don't actually know the answer to the broad question. I will say that my COO and I have a friendly competition, and we'll regularly. Office 365 has a feature where you can look at volumes, so email volumes and meeting volumes, and consistently, it's not a contest, but I have won consistently against my COO in so much that I have more email, both incoming and outgoing. He, I will say, wins on the number of meetings because I tend to live in my inbox and he tends to live on Microsoft Teams, formerly Zoom and formerly Slack, and now it's kind of a potpourri of video conferencing solutions. So that has been pretty consistent for a while. So that data point would argue Canadians actually are more text based, whereas Americans perhaps more meeting based. I don't know.
And you're the only Canadian I know, so we're going to take it as fact. Thank you for solving the crisis here. Before we jump in to go to market and West Coast, East Coast, like we have a fun conversation planned today. Tell the people, what does Plurilock do?
Great question. Plurilock is a cybersecurity solutions provider. We started life actually doing AI before everybody decided AI was hip and cool. So we got started 2016. We had a unique ability to recognize people based on their behavior, the way that you type on the keyboard and move a mouse. we had some artificial intelligence where we could build a model of what was normal, baseline against that model, and then look for anomalies. We packaged that up as a form of cyber defense. And our thesis when we got going originally was that, hey, cybersecurity is a meritocracy. Best product is going to win. It's all about the tech. People don't matter. Process doesn't matter. Budgets don't matter, et cetera. Of course, I say that now somewhat tongue in cheek, because actually it's not about do you have the right product. It's about are the products deployed in a way that sufficiently reduces risk? Do you have the right people and skills in place? Do you have the right processes in place, et cetera? So it was a learning opportunity for us in so much as understanding that, hey, we need a lot of products and we need a lot of services in order to actually keep a company safe. So with that insight, we opted to grow through acquisition. We wanted to buy additional companies that had products and services that we could also bring to bear to our customers. So it was definitely a zag, whereas most people zigged. So we took the company public in 2020. Turned out to be a great time to do it. Best markets in the last 40 years, I think, was the statistic. And through that process allowed us to raise capital, close on 4 international acquisitions. And so today, Plurilock provides a whole host of products and services for keeping our customers safe and compliant. But the journey that we took to get here certainly is quite different compared to a traditional private company, raise VC funding, have a single product, et cetera.
That's awesome. And what industries do you typically work in, or is it pretty agnostic in terms of industries?
Historically, we've done a lot with both the U.S. and the Canadian federal governments. In fact, the U.S. federal government, if you count that as one customer, easily has been our largest customer for many years. On the commercial side, typically it's more mid-market enterprise organizations, your standard financial services, healthcare fields. Certainly, there's been historically a lot of budget there in those industries, and so you tend to see a lot of cybersecurity companies focus there. What we have realized in the last year or so is that there is a lot of need in the semiconductor and the smart manufacturing space. And so we've been spending a lot of time in that space, and actually just recently launched a new offering called Plurilock Critical Services, really focused on organizations who are global in nature and who have both a business problem, a technology problem, and a geopolitical problem. And it's really the intersection of those three. If you think of a Venn diagram, it's the intersection of those three fields where we're having disproportionate success. Partly it's because we've been doing so much work in the federal space, both again U.S. and Canada. We're able to bring a lot of that insight to bear to commercial companies who may not realize that they have the same types of nation state threats that a government would, but in today's environment, unfortunately, they do.
That's awesome. A lot to learn from the cross domain and government side over onto the commercial, which is really cool.
I'm gonna ask a stupid question and make all the smart things that you said, Ian, just like disappear into the air. So semiconductors. Have you ever touched Jensen Huang's jacket, his leather jacket?
No, I have not.
Okay, I haven't either. I feel like if you do and you work in semiconductors, you get like 3 wishes or something.
Is it, or do you just have like a permanent buff? Like, do you just get like a +3 on luck for the rest of your career?
Exactly. All right. So you've experienced and explored and acquired companies across the globe, which is really exciting and very cool. Maria and I have both worked at global companies, Maria more so, working over at NetSpy, which is big and has all this like exciting employees, right? Everywhere.
Yes. Yeah.
So tell us, go-to-market, as the CEO, you're heavily involved in go-to-market. And in our scoping call, we were talking about West Coast versus East Coast and the difference between go-to-market across different cultures. So, Lord Ian, tell us a little bit about what you've seen in your career when trying to line up all these go-to-markets across these different time zones, regions, places around the world. What's been interesting and different for you?
Before you answer that.
Yeah, before you answer that, because my questions are dumb. Go ahead, Maria.
Is it Team Tupac or Team Biggie? I need to know.
Oh, I can't. That's too polarizing. I don't think I can pick a side.
So what are you going to pick when we talk about the differences in go-to-market between East Coast, West Coast?
Well, I think it's just different. I don't know that there's one that's better or worse necessarily.
Okay.
I just think that it's different. And in some cases, you might have a situation that calls for one approach, and in a different situation might call for a different approach. I think in my experience, and this actually predates even my Plurilock career. Prior to Plurilock, I worked at a venture-backed company doing big data and analytics back before it was easy. When you had to actually build all your big data tools, and you couldn't just use Hadoop for everything. My boss at the time was a very hard-nosed VP of sales, and there was quite a distinction between his approach, which came from kind of the early East Coast software sales cultures, like companies like PTC, etc. And it was just a very different. It was a very different sales motion. Everything from the tone of your emails to how aggressive you would be, both in process, like do you send an email once a day or do you send an email once every week, but also in practice. I mean, I can remember we were in New York and we were selling to financial services, and just going to customer sites completely uninvited. And just showing up in the lobby and trying to get a meeting. It was a very different approach when you compare that to kind of a Silicon Valley tech company where folks were a little bit more laid back. It was open office. There was sushi bars that were there for your workers. And so it was just a very different approach. Now, what was interesting is that for some verticals, i.e. like financial services versus healthcare, for instance, different approaches I could see have different values or different impacts. And so I think what I have found really helpful is actually the diversity of experience with Plurilock in particular, because we've grown through acquisition, which has meant we've grown through step function. So we were one size, and then we added a whole bunch of people all at once through an acquisition. And so we've actually retained a lot of some of the individualness of those different cultures that we've acquired. Now, what that has meant, though, is that for us, when we get on a group sales call and we're talking about a really big account that we're trying to go after, as an example, the different perspectives actually become really helpful. And so one person will say, well, here's how I would approach it. Again, East Coast, just barrel down, kick down the door, etc. Versus West Coast, like, hey, can we send a bouquet of flowers? Very, very carrot as opposed to stick. And so having that diversity of experience actually, I think, is one of our benefits, because we get to attack problems and we get to look at problems from a multitude of perspectives.
I love that. And I imagine, like, after the pandemic, I feel like a lot of companies and a lot of teams have become a lot more global, because now we are more open to remote work and hiring remotely. And that does bring diversity in thought and ideas too on a round table.
I think so. I think you can still run into the danger of finding people who have the same background as yourself. They just happen to be transplanted at different places around the world or around North America. I think we've even very early on, we as a company, we had a lot of different people from a lot of different cultures. And in fact, our very first, one of the first offices we had back when we had offices, we went out of our way. We found an artist who specialized in Art Deco posters, and every person at the company would have their either their home city or their city that they sort of associated themselves with in the office. And so you would walk around and you would see Vancouver, British Columbia, and you'd see Washington, D.C., and then you'd see Sao Paulo in Brazil. And then you would see Prague in Czech Republic, and so you would see these different posters, and they were all tied to the people of the company. And so even from an early stage, that was always something that we found really helpful.
Are you East Coast or West Coast, Ian? Because I forgot Canada is a big hat to America, so it's wide, and like you could be anywhere in there.
Very true. So it's funny. I am West Coast based. However, I tend to spend a lot of time on the East Coast, and I think that some of the cultures at the executive level at Plurilock are a little bit more East Coast based. Having said that, I mean, we are a Slack company. We're not a Teams company. which I kind of associate as more West Coast based. So I would say maybe we pull from both cultures, if you will.
All right, so let's double click then on maybe 2 or 3 differences in go-to market between the 2 regions and what you've experienced.
I think on the East Coast, I would say it's a little bit more formal. I notice this actually when I go back and forth from Vancouver to Toronto, that even just people's dress code is a little bit more formal. There's more suits, there's more ties actually show up. On the West Coast, I really don't see that. And if anything, if I go from Vancouver down to San Francisco to RSA, for instance, I have to be very intentional. Like, don't take the sports coat, but take the really nice hoodie, like the nice one, like not the one that's kind of beat up, but like take the nice one. So dress code is one. I think the second is a little bit more focus on morning meetings. I feel like on the East Coast, there's people meet for breakfast. That doesn't really happen as much on the West Coast, I find. And then the third is maybe more of a focus on in-person. I think because going from Toronto to Ottawa or Toronto to New York or New York to Philly, it's more accessible. You don't have to fly 5 hours to get from one place to the next. There's more in-person opportunities. And so if you can plug into those, I think you're at a huge advantage. A friend of mine actually was responsible for growing. A company was based in Toronto, but he was responsible for growing their New York presence, and he had to be there in New York because he had to go to the events. He had to be there in person. It was an impossible task to try and do that remotely. You had to actually be in market, and I think that's more of an East Coast thing. Whereas on the West Coast, find the right Slack communities. Maybe there's a few Signal chats that you can kind of burrow your way into. I think it's more possible to expand virtually on the West Coast, if that makes sense, versus on the East Coast.
Maria, does this track with your experience too?
Yeah,
I think me and Maria are like totally like, well, we're both on the East Coast, so we're totally like in it. So when you're telling us, Ian, like your perspective, I'm like nodding. I'm like, oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah, no, that is very true. I mean, just an example, this is, not related to cybersecurity, but my husband works in advertising. And as soon as the pandemic was kind of, dying down, everybody had to go right back into in person. And it was very adamant in that industry that like business is done in person and it is what it is. And you kind of have to deal with that. But yeah,
you got to shake hands.
I mean, and that actually also, right, like you mentioned, it's a go-to market strategy and its differences. It really does affect sales, and it also affects marketing strategies too. Do you put more of your budget into digital, or do you do more field work and field events because that's where people are and that's where your business is?
I think really for us, it's about what does the customer want and how is it that you're going to mesh with their buying cycle? So if you're selling something, how are you going to mesh that against their buying process? And if it requires in-person meetings, then that's what you got to do. I mean, I have some stakeholders even within the same customer account who, on the one hand, hate meeting in person. They hate going on phone calls, but they love texting. And then within the same company, I have people saying, oh, we gotta, when's the next time you're going to be in San Francisco? We got to sit down. We got to get dinner. And so understanding the differences and how they want to engage, I think is crucial. And so that's why, again, I don't think that there's a good way or a bad way. It's about what are you trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish? And if you're trying to accomplish a sale, then you sort of have to match what you're doing against what they want.
Yeah,
absolutely. So Ian, let's switch gears. Tell us about how you went public. What was the story there?
So for us in Canada, and this circa 2019 or so, it was and it still is to a large extent a very different capital environment. So I think in the U.S., depending on where you are physically, obviously if you're in the Bay Area, but even I think if you're in New York, if you're in Austin, maybe in a few other places, there are different ecosystems of funding options. And sometimes what we find in Canada is that there's a lack of true venture funding. And so it becomes harder to do because there's less investors who are willing to or want to invest in private companies in Canada than in the US. because there's also less supply, if you will, less capital supply, the terms can be more aggressive than in the US. So it's very, very common for an entrepreneur to go out and pitch a number of investors in Canada, and they might get a $4 million or an $8 million pre-money valuation with all kinds of strings attached. So maybe there's special rights or there's warrants or whatever else. And then they can go down to the Bay Area. They can get a $20 million pre-money valuation. By the way, it's 20 million US, not 8 million Canadian. Very little strings. It's on a safe note. And there's a lot more people that they can meet with. So that is a fairly typical story for a Canadian. So how that plays into what we were doing was, around 2019, we had achieved some initial traction with the technology that we had. We came to this realization that customers that we wanted to sell to, or that we were selling to, had a whole lot more need than just what we could provide. And so that forced a decision. And the decision for us was, how do we want to, given this new piece of information, how do we want to react to that? So one of the things that we could have done is we could have taken a very channel-focused strategy. We could have gone and signed up a bunch of resellers and tried to position our product alongside a suite of other products. That was one option. Another option is we could have looked for an exit of some kind. We could have sold our technology into a broader platform. And I think actually sitting here today, we're certainly seeing the platformification of cybersecurity. So we saw some of the early signs of that 2019. And I think that we're sort of validated in the sense that people are moving to platforms. The third option is we could have tried to build the features missing to again affect a full solution. That would have been very capital intensive. Or the fourth option is we could have gone out and acquired other capabilities. And so we actually ran a process. So we looked at all of these four options, and we went out, we engaged, we got real feedback, meaning it's nice to say, yes, you should be able to raise money for X, but until you actually talk to investors, difficult to know whether that's true or not. And what we came back with, the data that we came back with, was that there seemed to be appetite to do option 4, which was to go out and acquire other companies. And in fact, we originally were looking at a go public without the acquisition strategy, and we're not as we did not get as positive a response. So based on the data that we had, we felt that the best way to increase shareholder value was to pursue that strategy. And so we committed to going public in the winter of 2019. And I can remember quite vividly, I had an advisor tell me, Ian, old grizzled corporate finance advisor, he said, Ian, you never know what's going to happen. You should try and raise a bridge round of financing, because you never know. And I said, well, I don't think we need it. He's like, yeah, listen, just you should go do it, and you should make sure that everybody is there, because you never know. And so we closed that bridge round of financing, I think it was February 27th or February 28th of 2020. And as we know now, the world collapsed on March 1st, 2020 from COVID. So it was a very prescient suggestion and piece of advice, and I'm very thankful for it. As it turned out, the public markets, as I said, were, I think, the best in 30 years or best in 40 years. So the timing worked out when we eventually got public in the fall of 2020. And then we rode the markets up, and we were able to leverage the currency that we had, so the actual public listing that we had, plus the access to capital to get done through acquisitions.
That's so exciting. That's like, hearing that, it's like dreams can come true, even in the face of pandemics and needing bridge capital and things of that nature. How have you? So here's a question for you, Ian, as a CEO, right? Because a lot of companies go public, or a lot of companies change their stage, and they get new CEOs, and you've stayed in place, which kudos. And I'm not saying you deserve, I'm not trying to be you should, right? Whatever. How has that changed how you operate as a CEO? And anything related to your, and I'm especially interested in this, anything related to your personal brand as well?
Well, the big thing is time allocation. And one of the things that you will get told on the go public journey is that you have two companies to run. You have the actual company, and then you have the public company. And until we actually started trading and we got listed, I didn't fully appreciate what was meant by that. What I now appreciate is that there is a allocation of time and money and resources necessary for the public entity, which is completely separate and has very little to do with the actual nuts and bolts of the business. And you have to allocate the time, money, and resources to that public entity. And so it's difficult to do everything that you were doing in the private company and then just tack on the public company stuff as well. And so what that meant for us, particularly at an early stage prior to the acquisitions, we were still a very small company. And we didn't have as much infrastructure in place. We didn't have a chief revenue officer. We didn't have, at that time, we didn't have a COO. We didn't have some of the components necessary to still run the core business while we had public company stuff to do. So that was the first one. Time allocation was one of the huge changes. Also, I think being able to change the culture around what we say privately, what we say publicly, when do we say things publicly, took a little bit of adjustment. Again, going back to the East Coast, West Coast mentality, I think one of the things that I would associate more with West Coast mentality is openness. So openness to numbers, openness to financial information, openness to, everybody gets access to the same amount of information at the same time. And for regulatory reasons that you can't do that. You have to change that. And you have to, and so that kind of, in my mind, skews more towards East Coast mentality, more hierarchical, et cetera. So there were just changes across the board that were, I would say, non-obvious or maybe, not just financially based. Like, sure, it costs money to be a public company. I think a lot of people realize that, and that's easy to quantify. The harder ones to quantify were things like time and culture and behavior, because those were things that were perhaps underappreciated in that transition.
Makes a lot of sense. Do you Ian pre-going public and Ian post-going public, from a CEO brand perspective, and just talking to you for a few minutes, I could already tell that you are that type of CEO that really does lead brand building for the company and is out there being the face of the company and a thought leader and all of that. So did you change your personal brand as CEO before and after? Sorry, after, when going public.
I think I did. I think for me, brand is less about the things that you do, and it's more about looking behind you to see what impact it's had. And so I think there was certainly a shift. Again, similar to what I said in the last answer around communication or disclosure information. I used to write a monthly shareholder update. And it was pretty broad. I mean, it was actual shareholders, and then it was friends of the company, and it was employees, et cetera. And it went into a lot of detail. And so those types of things, I stopped doing, again, kind of regulatory reasons about who gets access to what when. I did start doing a lot more shorter form, but more frequent engagements. So I would never have done like a 2-minute or 5-minute short video on LinkedIn as a private company, but as a public company, actually, that was quite normal, right? To have just little snippets and snapshots. So I think that there were some changes in that regard. I think the other thing that changed, though, was where I allocated my time. Again, was I did a lot more, or I do a lot more investor and shareholder focused communication. Whereas as a private company, I never would have done that. I would have, would have all been sales oriented. It would have been around thought leadership from a domain perspective, from a cybersecurity perspective, or if we were very focused on a specific vertical like semiconductors, where we are right now, that also would have been something that I would allocate a lot of time to. And so again, trying to spread, you only have so many hours in the day. Right. Generally, it's 24. Every now and again, you get 25 from daylight savings times. And so how do you allocate that finite resource against the different communication strategies that you need to run? I think absolutely changed from pre and post being public.
Awesome. Give us a little, before we get into our game, give us a little tips, some time-saving tips from Lord Ian.
Time-saving tips.
Because there's not enough hours in the day for either of us. either. And we don't even have a public company yet. So
I don't know that I have any secrets to time savings. I have things that work well. I mean, I think anything that you can automate, you should. Anything that you can delegate, you should. Although I think that on the delegation front, I don't think you can ever delegate as much as you would like to be able to do. I think one thing, I mean, this sounds very basic, but trying to optimize for, if you have to take a flight, trying to optimize for ones that have Wi-Fi and like a good track record of the Wi-Fi actually working. My staff tends to get really annoyed when there's a flight where I don't have Wi-Fi because it goes dark. And then as soon as I land, their inboxes light up with emails just going pew, 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 pew. And so there's usually some grumbling about that. I think those types of things are important, but it's sort of like sales. You never have enough selling time in the day. And so as an executive, you never have enough executive hours in the day. You have to prioritize, and things are going to slip off the list, even if you don't necessarily want them to.
Sobering reminder from Ian that one cannot do everything every day, right? One must prioritize. So I think it's time for our game. What do you think, Maria?
I think so. Yikes. Okay, that's my cue to explain things.
You're like, yep.
Yep.
Silence.
So, Ian, every episode, Giana and I take turns at guessing what our guest would be doing in their career today if they weren't working currently in cybersecurity or as a CEO of a company or marketing, so on and so forth. The rules are we can't pick something that's explicitly, disclosed by you in any public site. Sometimes the guesses are just wild, literally out of this world. Sometimes they're very spot on and very creepy. And then, so then we'll say our guesses, and then you tell us which one is closest. And if we both fail miserably, just tell us what you would actually be doing. Sound good?
Let's do it.
Awesome. Giana, you go first.
All right. I'm stuck between two things. I think because you're smart, you're analytical, but you're also funny. So I kind of think you're either going to be like a thespian or like an astronaut. And
who's the funniest astronaut that you've ever met?
You, I guess, maybe.
All right. Good answer.
I'm going to guess a stand-up comedy astronaut. So you're an astronaut. You're trained. This is my guess. You'd be an astronaut trained to do astronautics, which is the field of astronautology. And you also are a stand-up comedian. So you actually go up to space to do shows for everyone who lives up in space, because it's also 100 years from now. Great guess, right?
I like it.
100 light years, or I don't understand.
I will say, actually, NASA is a very large partner of ours.
Oh.
So we have some data to support. Maybe this is possible.
All right.
There you go. Mine's actually also another wild one. I told you this is going to be wild. Like Giana always has these wild.
People get mad at me.
Ideas.
They go a little too wild.
I actually think you would do something in the sort of Zen travel leisure space, or possibly like, I don't know, you could possibly tie it to corporate, but like, Zen retreats for stressed adults and parents. I don't know.
Well, that is a West Coast profession if I've ever heard one.
Yeah, where you serve avocado on salad and stuff.
Avocado on salad? What? Is that what you think of when you think of?
I support avocados on salads. That's a great choice.
No, we're pro that here. Everyone listening, we are pro avocado. I think, right?
100%.
100. Okay.
Hashtag Team Avocado.
Exactly.
Yes. So how miserably did we do?
Well, I mean, I think that the astronaut. I don't know if there's any higher calling, pun intended, to be in the. What do you call it? Astronautics?
Astronautology.
We're going to have to dictionary check that one.
Yeah.
Hey, Siri.
Astronautics.
So, I mean, that's the one that I like the most. So I'm going to go with that one.
Yay, okay. I finally win. Yes.
That's wild and out of this world.
Out of this world.
Idea.
Well, you just did worse than me, Maria. You could have chose that. You could have
That's true.
You could have been like race car driver, maybe. That would have been,
that's true.
A good one.
So
too.
what would you do? What would you be doing if you weren't CEO of a cybersecurity company?
I mean, so just sticking on the astronaut theme for a second, there's a number of deep tech companies that I think are quite interesting right now. There's a couple of people looking at small nuclear reactors as a form of power generation, fusion, and then some of the other ones that are, quote, out of this world are around asteroid mining and some of the space infrastructure that's being put in place. So I think all of those things are super interesting to me. I think particularly if you plot where we are today on the launch capacity from what SpaceX and some of the other providers are able to get to orbit now, and the reduction in cost there, I think it opens up a new world of capabilities. And I'm actually not trying to do these puns, so I apologize to everybody. but I think, I do think that there's some really interesting stuff happening that's just on the edge right now of what's possible. And so if you fast forward 20 years or 50 years or 100 years, I think there'll be some really interesting, exciting, different things happening in space that could be quite interesting to, again, allocate time on.
Okay, Ian, I feel like you're pandering to me because I picked astronaut trilogy. I picked astronautics, and now you're going on and on about deep space tech and everything. Is it true? Was I actually on point, or are you being nice because you're Canadian?
I can neither confirm nor deny the niceness quotient of being a Canadian, but I will say I think genuinely that there is some really interesting stuff, and bringing it back to cybersecurity for a minute, there are profound cybersecurity implications for stuff that gets launched into space, particularly when you're talking about a fusion reactor or a nuclear reactor. So there are some interesting elements to thinking about what we do today, which is cybersecurity, and how would you apply that to things that you don't necessarily have physical access to. Things that might be pretty far away, and so latency is high, and it's just different than what happens here on Earth.
Right, you have to make doubles of them, virtual doubles, and pen test those and do interesting things. That's cool. Well, Ian, where can people find you if they want to find you and you want to be found?
Ian L. Patterson. Typically, LinkedIn is going to be the best place to find me, although I do frequent the artist formerly known as Twitter. Not really sure what we're calling that these days. But Ian L. Patterson on LinkedIn or ian@plurilock.com. People are welcome to reach out and say, hey, what's up?
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ian, for joining the show today. We really appreciate it. It was such a fun chat. Although I lost, that's okay. It's a long weekend. I have enough days to recover.
You'll be drinking all weekend. You have 3 days to drink and cry about how.
Right. That's right. Rosé all day. That kind of weekend upcoming. Well, thank you to our listeners. Thanks for joining us today. Remember, there's a new episode that drops every Wednesday, so be sure to subscribe and give us as many stars as possible. And tell all your friends in cybersecurity marketing and sales and everywhere else in cybersecurity about this show. See you all next time.
See you soon.